This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here.
Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line there.
We're looking at 10.5, 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah, copy.
Welcome back, podcast listeners, and many thanks for joining us. It's great to have you along. As many of you have noticed, we've had a little bit of a break. It wasn't planned, but August was a busy month for us, as some of you may know. But we're back with a bang. We have a real treat in store this month. A professional sailor you, our listeners, have requested to hear from, possibly more than any other. So that's all coming up shortly. Before that, a quick catch-up. No podcast last month, partly because the pair of us were in Tokyo for the Olympics, watching all the sailing unfold at the sailing venue in Enoshima. It was a regatta full of drama, and I hope some of you managed to watch it. A massive congratulations to all the medal winners. There were a few former podcast guests up there on the podium, and I hope we'll be hearing from a few more over the coming months. But also, we'd both like to say a massive heartfelt thank you to the people of Enoshima, to the volunteers and staff at the venue. It wasn't a normal Olympic Games by any stretch, but the people of Japan were wonderful. So many thanks for your hospitality and your patience. Straight back from Tokyo, I was then immediately into preparation for the Fastnet race. I arrived home just 36 hours before the start gun, so I had a bit on, racing double-handed with the impressively talented Henry Bombi. For those that may have missed this, we've been racing the double-handed circuit this summer, and I've really loved it. Tokyo didn't give us the best run into the Fastnet, and we had a slight wobble on the start line. But after that, we found our groove, and what a race we had. I don't want to give too much away because, as I've mentioned before, our Fastnet campaign has been documented by the talented Tim at Bendigo Films. And our full Fastnet adventure is online for all to see. Head over to Shirley Robertson's Sailing Podcast on YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, check it out. If you've some time on your hands, you can watch the whole box set, 4 films about our offshore season, the finale being our Fastnet adventure. Check it out, it's good fun. A massive thanks to all of you who have contributed and left messages on buymeacoffee.com. It's really appreciated. As we've said before, it takes a lot of time to put this together. Tim and I put a lot of effort into the pods, and we'd like to try and stay ad-free. So a big fat thank you to all of you who have supported us. If you like what you hear and you haven't done so, then it's really easy to find. buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. It's super quick, super easy, and greatly appreciated. Right, on to our guest this month. He's a man that's been on 3 America's Cup winning teams. He boasts an Olympic silver medal and won his first world title at just 18 years of age. But accolades and titles are only half of it. There's a lot more to this month's guest than world titles, although of those, he has many. When you think of fast multi-hulls, generally you think of the French offshore scene. You think, of course, of Mr. Multi-Hull, my good friend Loic Perron, his brother Bruno, Frank Camas, and latterly Francois Gabard. But when it comes to making multi-hulls go fast, Australian sailor Glenn Ashby is the master. He has 10 A-class world titles, and A-class worlds this century without Ashby on the podium is a significant rarity. All the while, he was also winning Formula 18 and Tornado World Championships, and getting a successful cup career off the ground. Not bad for a lad that grew up over 100 miles from the sea in the middle of Victoria, Australia. In the second part of the pod, we discuss how multi-hulls in the America's Cup was a dream come true for Glenn, and how being part of the defeat for Team New Zealand in San Francisco was a catalyst for the team's subsequent successes that Glenn has been such an integral part of. But before all that, we discuss Glenn's early sailing career, the Olympic Games, making boats go fast, and a whole lot more. We recorded this edition remotely. Glenn was just back at home after some time relaxing post the Cup win earlier this year. I hope you enjoy the time I spent with Glenn Ashby.
I started sailing when I was sort of 6.5, 7 years old, and I didn't actually sail on the sea until I was 10. Sailmaking it was for me, and have been a sailmaker ever since, and proud of it. Here I am in Europe, sleeping under my boat cover with not 2 cents to rub together.
Glenn Ashby, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. You're requested a lot by our listeners, so it's so good to have you. A massive thanks for joining us from Melbourne. Glenn, the last time I saw you was the morning after the Cup victory celebration, and you were wheeling the biggest, meanest looking, badass motorbike out of Team New Zealand base, with your head and maybe your heart already into the next adventure. I mean, tell us what you've been up to since that win in Auckland.
Yeah, look, it's it sort of feels funny. Like you finish, and you finish an event like that, and the reason I had my bike in the base was that it was probably going to end up in the water. I think if I didn't go and wheel it inside that night, someone would have wheeled it over the edge of the dock. But yeah, look, as far as since the few months since then, it's just been really, really nice to, I guess, reflect, spending some time, both in New Zealand and back in Australia, catching up with friends and family. You end up sort of, quite head down, bum up, I suppose, doing what you need to do through those sort of busy last few months. And it is really, really nice to sort of drop your shoulders and, catch up with those that have supported you and been part of the journey. And, certainly in New Zealand, we had some great little adventures, some bike riding and some great walks with friends. And then coming back to Australia a couple of months later after the Cup, we've had some really nice sort of catch-ups, I guess, with family that we hadn't really been able to see for about a year and a half, actually. So even though you were only 3.5 hours flight away from Australia, it was with COVID, it was just simply not possible to go home. So to catch up with your family and your parents and the kids with their grandparents, it's been really lovely. So yeah, just sort of getting your feet back on the ground, taking a few deep breaths, and contemplating what the future may hold.
I can imagine it's also a bit weird post-Cup. I mean, you spend long days together with your team, with such purpose, so much focus, and then it's over and you all go off and do your own thing. How's it been for you? Do you miss them, or have you been happy just tinkering in that legendary shed of yours?
No, that's always good. Every man needs a shed. But look, I really miss the guys. I miss the program. It's you pretty much go cold turkey. The day after the Cup finishes, and you don't know when it's going to finish. The day after it finishes, it's like bang, and it's like a guillotine's come down and just chopped everything off. It's the end. It signals the end, and it's quite a full-on abrupt stop. And yeah, it's been quite a change, and coming back to Australia, you've never really felt so far away from the team and your mates and from New Zealand, even though we're just across the ditch. You feel a world away. So it is strange, and the girls miss their friends over there, and their schoolmates and all our friends and contacts in New Zealand. We miss everybody, but at the same time, it is nice to come back and see your family, which, you haven't seen for a while. So you sort of feel a bit torn, to be honest.
I'm going to ask you quickly about that big bike. I'm surprised that you're allowed to ride that thing, either by your wife, Mel, or the people that pay your wages. Although I know there's a bit of a big bike culture at Team New Zealand. I filmed at the racetrack with your boss, Grant Dalton, of course. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, I'm probably pretty fortunate to have Dalts also interested in riding bikes as well. We've done quite a bit of riding together over the years, and when I first joined Team New Zealand, we did some great rides together, and I certainly understand his passion for bikes and the sport of motorcycling, and I think he understands my growing up in the bush and my enthusiasm for two-wheeled machines as well. So, you definitely take a pretty, careful approach that last sort of few months before the America's Cup itself. It's, you give yourself pretty much a self ban on doing that sort of activity to a sort of the level that you would normally do. And but yeah, I just basically love my bikes, and it's really, really nice to be able to spend some time getting back on the bike and not having to worry about sort of what jib to put up, I guess.
Well, we'll chat a bit about bikes later, and also the Cup, Glenn. But first, let's wind the clock back. You're a young boy from Bendigo, a gold mining town 2 hours from Melbourne. What was that like? Describe life growing up with the Ashbys in the 80s.
Look, I feel really, really fortunate, I guess, to have grown up in Bendigo, in central Victoria, far away from the sea. Nearly 2.5 hours drive from Melbourne and Port Phillip Bay. But growing up as a kid, in the 80s, I guess, with mum and dad's enthusiasm for sailing and for motorbiking and camping and sort of adventuring, I guess, when we were kids. I just have some super fond memories of, mucking about with boats out at the local lake and riding bikes and sort of kicking the football around. And it's, Bendigo in central Victoria gets extremely hot and dry and dusty in the summer. The local lake that we grew up on, is a reservoir, and it would basically dry out over the summer months until it basically became almost impossible to go sailing. There'd be dead trees sort of poking up out of the water, and you'd be sort of dodging those, and occasionally you'd be running into them that were under the water. And you'd wait for winter to come around, and everything would green up and the dust would disappear and everything would get sort of muddy and, clean and tidy. And as far as the flora and fauna went, and you'd be riding your motorbike, and you'd sort of put the boat away for a few months, and you'd get out on your BMX and your motorbikes and play soccer, and you'd watch the lake fill back up again. It was sort of, it had a tide, but it was a yearly cycle, not a daily cycle. So, you'd go back out to the lake a couple of months later, and the water would literally be hundreds of metres higher than it was when you left. And, quite a few times if it rained a lot, and they didn't get the jetty hooked up to the tractor quick enough, the whole jetty would disappear under the water, and there'd be a big working bee to try and drag the jetty out so they didn't lose it. So, some real good fun and games. And I think, those early memories of, growing up in Bendigo, certainly, you remember those times fondly, and sailing around in a sort of a muddy puddle. But absolutely getting the best out of your boat and the conditions. And I think the shiftiness, and the puffiness and sort of the diversity of that sort of location. I think if you could sail well on the lake, when you got to some other venues as you got older, you didn't get frustrated by shifty winds and random places. You actually were like, oh no, this is pretty normal and I know what to do here. And, success came sometimes in those shifty European lake venues when you first went across there.
I asked Darren Bundock, who you sailed with at the games, a few questions, and one of the points he made was that Lake Epilogue was basically a puddle. That when he went to see it was completely dry. I mean, none of the privileges of growing up, by the sea.
No, look, it was, I didn't sail on the sea. I started sailing when I was sort of, 6.5, 7 years old, and I didn't actually sail on the sea until I was 10. So the first sort of 3.5 years of my sailing were done on the lake. And, it was a bit of an eye opener going down to the sea and the ocean, for the first time sailing. I was, it was pretty daunting actually sailing in the big waves, and really different to the lake. And, it was quite an experience that I still remember it to this day, that first time sailing on the ocean. And I think Bendigo, there was some really, really good lessons I think learnt from even just living in a country town and being able to make do with what you had. We didn't have any fancy gear. It was I didn't have a new sail until I was about 15 or 16 years old, so I dealt with just old secondhand gear right the way through until I was well into my teenage years. And I don't know if that was the reason for becoming a sail maker, so I could make a new sail or not. But it was, you just got used to adjusting things and recutting and remaking and refairing and repainting and just working on old stuff to try and get the best out of it. And I think those lessons are something that I think still reign true with what I do now.
What kind of a boy was the young Glenn Ashby? Was he always looking out the window at school, dreaming of going fast?
Yep, I think I probably was. To be fair, when I really enjoyed school. I was probably a little bit naughty at times, but got along really well. With I think the teachers globally, and was always inquisitive and always was asking a lot of questions. And my grandpa actually called me, little what and why when I was growing up, and I probably exactly as I'm now, always asking questions and just wanting to learn more and understand things better. And I think at school for me, absolutely sort of wanted to basically just get out of school so I could go and jump on my bike or go out to the lake. So, it was, we had a great group of, kids that I grew up with that, did a lot of, sort of BMX riding and mountain biking, and our back gate opened up into the state forest or into the bush. So you come home and you chuck your school bag off and chuck a pair of shorts on, and away you go into the bush for hours on the bike. So until you'd sort of hear mum, yell out, or you knew that it was getting dark and you got hungry, you'd go home for dinner. And that was sort of pretty much the Bendigo lifestyle at that particular time growing up at school.
It sounds good. Yeah, I mean, as a boy, you were smaller than your peers, but that didn't stop you. You won the Under-11 Victoria Championships, I'm guessing on the sea. How big a difference did that victory make to Glenn Ashby? What do you remember of it?
It's a great question, Shirley. And you've obviously done your homework well. That was actually the first time I did sail on the sea, that Victorian Championships. And that regatta really probably was the one of the defining moments, I guess, for me, is in the sport, I guess, at that particular time. And I wouldn't realise that probably till years went past. But one of the I think it was the second day of the 3-day regatta was a really, really windy day. And basically out of the sort of 20 or 30 boats that were there, I think only 7 finished. That on the only race of that windy day, and I was in 7th position. But just finishing that race, it took me. I was about half an hour after the last boat had finished. I was sort of still chipping away and capsizing and getting back up and going a bit further and capsizing and trying to beat my way up to the finish line at Macrae, actually, which is my home club now, where we live here in Macrae. And long time ago now, 30 odd years ago, but just finally being able to get to the finish line and capsizing a couple of times and finally getting it through and getting a cheer from the race committee, and getting back to the beach finally. And I was absolutely spent. I was completely knackered that night, but finishing that race and just realising that you'd battled through, you'd finished 7th out of all the big kids as well, because we were the juniors in amongst the big kids. And the street cred that you sort of got from some of the bigger kids, being just a little tiny kid. I haven't really grown much since then, to be honest, but it's it was pretty cool. It was seeing the big kids coming up and patting you on the back and sort of saying, "Oh, well done, you're a great job in finishing." It was sort of like, wow, that was pretty cool. And the next day, we had, I think, 2 or 3 races, and I just sort of did those the best I could, and getting that 7th position was sort of enough, for me to win the junior championship. And that was like, wow, if you try hard and you stick at it and you don't give up, then crikeys, you can get some good results. And after that, it was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do from now on, and that's sort of what I've done ever since.
Do you tell your kids that story?
I think my mum and my dad probably tell that story. I don't sort of talk to them much about that, but mum and dad, I think, have told them the story, and I think they were, they've listened, and they're certainly, taken it on board. Particularly Lani, our eldest one, she knows that you just sometimes you got to do the hard yards, and you get knocked down, and you get up, and you get knocked down again, and you just got to keep battling away. And I think in life, really, there's plenty of plenty of times where you, as you know as well with your sailing career, it doesn't come easy. If it came easy, then everyone would be doing it and everyone would be successful. So I think, doing the hard yards and being prepared to, get knocked about a bit, but keep charging through, then I think good things come.
Well, you weren't just good at competitive sailing, Glenn. I mean, you're also pretty handy on a bike. Competitive sailing won in the end. Talk to me a little bit about that. It's a big lesson for a youngster, isn't it? I mean, that you can't really do everything to a high level. How hard was it to make that decision, and how close were you to a career in two wheels?
Yeah, look, it's a really great question. It was a really, probably one of the toughest decisions of my life, I guess. Making that call as a sort of 14-year-old, ultimately in the end, where I had to sort of really put a line between the two sports. I tried to do both. I raced BMX from when I was 5 years old through till I was about 10 or 11 years old, and then I started racing motocross from 11 years old or 10 years old through till I was about 14. And I loved both sailing and motorbikes, and basically it got to a point where I had to pay. I was paying for it all myself, and I was working before and after school, to earn pocket money to do both sports. And I was sort of running myself ragged, and, my boat was pretty average and I needed to upgrade it to get better results. And the same thing with motorbiking. In the end, I was, I couldn't replace my tyres anywhere near as often as I really needed to get to the level that I wanted to get to. And it sort of got to the point where I was just doing both sports sort of averagely, which was frustrating me. And really had to make a call, and remember sitting down with mum and dad and, a few friends and family, and they're just like, you're going really well in both, but we think you'd last longer if you went sailing. We think you'd probably wrap yourself around a tree or, end up on your head at some stage or other on your bike. And they didn't force the decision on me. It was completely my decision. And, it was a bloody tough decision, but ultimately sort of got, made the pathway to go sailing, which it was a 50-50, and, I love my sailing and always have, and I still love my bikes and always have. It's just I've probably gone a little bit better in sailing than I have on my bike, but I love my bike riding, and it gives me, the same satisfaction now at 43 years old, probably riding the best I ever have, ever, now. And I think that's possibly experience and knowledge, and probably the equipment too has obviously got better, and maybe it masks some of your mistakes a bit better than the old bikes did. But it's one of those ones that I think both sports have been a huge part of my life, and I think you can take attributes and skills from both disciplines and actually feed them together. And it's quite often I'll be using analogies of how the bikes feel, or how riding feels versus how we're sailing, and particularly the balance and how things need to work together, and how you have to really become one with your bike like you do on the boat, as you know very well. So a lot of similarities, but ultimately, went sailing, and sort of glad I did, because my fingers and my arms all still work.
That's good news. Glenn, you left school at 16 to become an apprentice sailmaker. I mean, a life ahead of you as a professional sailor. It was pretty brave, I guess, exciting, and a common route to success amongst our guests on the podcast. I mean, was there a backup plan at all?
Yeah, look, I went to school, and my sort of goal going through school was either to become a meteorologist, g'day clouds, or a surveyor, actually a land surveyor. And I sort of enjoyed being outdoors, and, always watching the weather, and, but surveying I was quite interested in, measuring things and being out in the bush, and, having to sort of delve through different places, particularly in central Victoria. There was, quite a lot of undulating ground, and, I quite enjoyed that as well, and that sort of outdoors activity. But in the end, I was sort of about 6 weeks into starting year 11 at school, and my dad actually was out at the local sail loft in Bendigo at Greg Goodall's sail loft, and basically was talking to Greg, and who was a world A-class champion, and was sailing Tornado catamarans at the time. And basically was talking to Greg. My dad sort of came home and said, "Oh, look, Greg's after an apprentice, and he thinks you'd be you'd be, pretty good. Would you be interested? And this was on a Wednesday. I said to my mates on Friday afternoon, I might not be back in on Monday. I've got a job offer, and made the decision over the weekend, and basically went in on Monday and picked up my books out of my locker and went straight to the sail loft and started sweeping the floor and making cups of tea and coffee for everyone else and learning about sail making. And that was pretty much it. It was literally done over a 3 or 4 day period, and I completely tacked, from where I thought I was going. I had this opportunity, and I got supported with mum and dad. They really supported me and thought that would be a great opportunity, because you're working with your hands, you're outdoor, you're using your maths and your science skills. And it was great. That single decision probably has been the best decision of my whole career to date, I think. And the support I had from friends and family. At the time, some of my friends were pretty negative on leaving school, and some of their parents were like, "Oh, you've ruined your life, and you should be getting an education." And but I think the school of life, for me over the next few years was so, the learning curve was so steep, and having the opportunity to travel internationally, 2 or 3 years after I started sail making was really just the key in the door to open a huge amount of fun times and great regattas and a whole lot of learning that I never thought potentially possible. So sail making it was for me, and have been a sail maker ever since, and proud of it.
It's pretty impressive at such a young age to be able to make such big decisions. I think just listening to you, I think, at 14 to make that life-changing decision, bike or boat, and then at 16 to just know that this was the right thing, that it felt right.
Yeah, look, I a lot of people ask me, how did you make that? And I procrastinate way more now than I did back then. Back then, sometimes it was just like, okay, this feels right, and I'm gonna go with it. And you sort of almost made it happen once you'd made the call, and you took the bull by the horns. And I think you could say it was good luck or good management, both those decisions. But at the end of the day, it was just the life that you were living at the particular time. And it wasn't until years and years later that you sort of look back and you went, wow, that's here I am in Europe, sleeping under my boat cover in Switzerland or Austria or Germany or Italy, with not 2 cents to rub together, but you're there with a really cool boat, and that you own yourself, and you're not sure how you're going to get to the next regatta. You'll beg, borrow, steal a trailer or get a ride with somebody, but it didn't matter that you were sleeping under your boat cover, because you're in Europe looking up at the mountains while you're lying on your boat. I mean, it was just epic. And those experiences and the friends and the people that you met, you'd just be, I was blown away, and you just wanted more of it, and you wanted to do better and better and better. And I still to this day have some epic friends that have, been a huge part of that. And, their kids are coming to visit us in Australia now, and we're having their kids, when they're first starting to travel, come across. And over the last few years, it's been a pretty cool cycle of, they looked after me when I was sort of in need, and, now you can repay the favour. So yeah, pretty cool.
It's a good community, that's for sure. I mean, before we move on, Glenn, I must ask you, do you get back to Bendigo at all? I mean, I promised Aussie offshore legend Nick Maloney that I'd bring up the Glenn Ashby statue on Main Street there. What's all that about?
Yeah, that's just Nick being Nick. So there is no statue, but Nick's a good bugger. He's a funny bloke too. Need to catch up with old Lonesy. There
should be. I think we should start a campaign for a Bendigo statue of Glenn Ashby. Glenn, I've also heard a great story of how a bet with your boss led to your first World Championship success. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, look, Greg Goodall's been, obviously a huge part of my early sailing career and sail making career. And I was basically just turned 18 years old, and was heading off to a regatta up in New South Wales with Greg. So Greg and I had the boats double decked on the trailer, heading up to the regatta. And I just sort of had an old prototype boat that was one of the early sort of heavy chopped up boats that the new shaped A class was going to be for the future boats. And a little bit overweight and a little bit sort of wobbly, down the sides. But it was, nonetheless, it was a good boat. And so Greg basically said to me, well, if you can do well here, there's an opportunity that you could head across the world. So he sort of said you got to make sure you beat me. As a bit of a joke driving up, and I sort of took that as a shit. This is a good opportunity to to possibly get myself a trip to Europe and potentially be able to sail a new boat possibly that we were developing in a world championships in Spain. So I suffice to say I did my very best at that regatta and sailed a good event and beat Greg, and we drove back home, and Greg and Jim Boyer, who was building the boats in Bendigo, made good with their promise. And I saved up an airline ticket, and my nana, I think, actually helped out with the majority of it from memory. And off I went to Italy, and actually flew into Holland and fitted out a few masts, and then actually drove down through Italy and down into Spain. And spent the first few days patching up a few little holes in the bottom of the boat, because that was sort of a new construction method. Got those sorted out with Scott Anderson actually and Murray Philpott, who sort of put their arms around me and took me under their wings, and thought, who's this young bloke from Bendigo? I was absolutely as green as grass. I'd never been to Europe before, and so got down there and basically didn't know anybody, and rigged up the boats and went out and went sailing. Got to the first race of the regatta, which was quite windy, and I think I won the first race by about 7.5 minutes. So it was a bit of an eye opener, and I sort of got around the first mark and in fourth, and passed a few boats down the first reach, and then just never looked back. Just kept completely sending it the whole way around the racetrack, and so that was sort of the regatta, and won, I think, in the end by a point. And won my first Worlds just having just turned 19, so out of 87 competitors. So it was cool. It was a big shock, and I don't think anybody, including myself, was even thought you were going to get anywhere near it. But one of those ones where you sort of surprise yourself and surprise other people. And I was actually probably quite a lot. I was about 10 or 15 kilos heavier then than I am now, funnily enough. I was about 85 kilos for that event as a sort of a 19-year-old. Spent a lot of time at the gym lifting heavy things back then, and it was a fairly windy regatta. So I managed to sort of keep up with the bigger guys, and one of those ones that I'll absolutely never forget. I had a French guy. I remember I heard this noise on the window in the morning. Heard this bang 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 on the window, and he was throwing stones from down on the street up to where I was staying in my hotel to wake me up, because I'd been out a little bit too late, checking out the local establishments and meeting some new people, and got down to the boat park, and the whole fleet had left. My boat was the only one left on the beach with a cover on, so I managed to just make it out to the start line and start. I think it might have been a general recall actually, and I think I managed to sneak through and start, and if I hadn't have made that race, I would have lost the regatta. So sometimes you need a bit of luck, but it was good fun.
Oh my God, that's the stuff of nightmares. You wake up in the middle of the night.
You do, and sometimes you still wake up going, "Well, they've all gone, left without me." And it probably wasn't the first time, and certainly wasn't the last over the next few years where you'd be the last one in the boat park arriving. That's for sure. But it all works out. It all works out in the end. It was pretty difficult, I guess. Coming from Bendigo, having an aspiration of going to the Olympics in sailing. That Olympics probably has given me the drive to push even harder. A 90 foot by 90 foot trimaran is a pretty different boat than a Tornado.
I mean, that victory, Glenn, really opened the door, didn't it? I mean, you became Mr. ACAT after that, winning a remarkable 10 ACAT Worlds. I mean, talk to anyone who sailed with you, and they talk about your natural talent, your abundance of feel, particularly at pace. When did you know that you had that? And describe that feeling for our listeners. What's it like to know how to make a fast boat go even faster?
I think being comfortable, being uncomfortable is probably a way of describing, how to go faster and how to push things further. And certainly in, boats like the A-Cat, the Tornado, multi-hulls in general, or high-performance dinghies, skiffs, moths, types of boats I guess we're seeing now in the America's Cup. It's something that you don't get comfortable, overnight. It takes time, but I think pushing yourself up to the edge of where you feel in control, stepping back, pushing yourself up a little bit further, stepping back, recognizing the signs, just like you do on a bike or in a car, where you have to use 100 to 110% of your sailing ability or your riding ability to stay in control, and then stepping back to sort of 80% and being comfortable at pushing 80 to 90%, stepping back to 80%. When you get into situations where you need 100% of your talent, you've seen the movie before. You've done that in training. You know where the edge is. You know when to push, and you know that's where you're on the ragged edge. And I think doing that and making mistakes, breaking some gear, crashing and burning, that's all part of it in training. But when you get to the pointy end of a high-performance regatta, knowing when you can step up to where you might make the passing opportunity and have to use 100% of your ability, and being confident that you're not going to step over to 110 and make a mistake, that I think is probably something that I think bike riding probably taught me as a young kid, is to learn where the edge is and keep pushing that and keep putting yourself in an uncomfortable position and being comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you get being in that situation. I think that's certainly something with particularly the sort of the high performance nature of, I guess, most of the boats that I've sailed. You can be sitting there extremely comfortable while everyone else around you is absolutely shitting their pants. And that's, that's okay. That's all right. And I think then, working together and conveying that confidence of, hey guys, we're under control. We've got this. This is just fine. As a group, then you can take the next step forward, and then everybody's comfortable, and then you take the next step and the next step. And I think that's something that's been, really cool to be part of, not only with Darren and doing the Olympic campaigns and sailing those sort of boats over the years, and by yourself on the A-Cat and the Moth and that sort of thing, but in a wider team environment where you've got, millions of dollars worth of assets that you're testing and developing and pushing. Knowing where the edge is and being comfortable with that, I think, breeds great confidence with your design team and your engineering team and your fellow teammates. And I think that's something that's been a really fantastic part of the last 10 or 12 years of being involved with the America's Cup.
Are you braver than everyone else? Are you a brave person?
Possibly. I've had so many crashes and falling off things, over the years, that you probably do have to be a bit brave. And sometimes it hurts, sometimes you get up and you're like, wow, that was a good one. And certainly through BMX and motocross, you have to be brave if you want to win on those environments. You have to be brave. And I think that's that side of my life. I think from being really young, I think probably taught a bit of having to be brave. And you weren't a big guy. You had to be brave. You had to push hard when other people were sort of backing off. You had to push hard to make the pass and to win races when you probably shouldn't have. And I think that's something that's that's probably just been ingrained since I was a little kid. But I think I'm probably getting less brave now that I'm getting older with other things. But at the same time, I think your experience and your calculated risk that you take these days, I think is way more managed accurately these days after having some experience than possibly what it was when you're a 19-year-old and you just centered and maybe your skill set was a little bit better and you managed to stay upright.
I think there's more to it though than just, pushing when it's extreme. Everybody talks about your feel for what's going on. When others don't, you know what's going on. Just describe that, the finesse of it.
Yeah, I think in this sort of day and age, it's almost too easy for kids, particularly, I think, and adults as well. But it's too easy to just be given good equipment and be given a new mast and be given a new sail and a new set of foils and go out and you're just tacking and jibing and that's how you buy your speed. I think that feel and that finesse, I think, probably for me came from just fiddling around with my own stuff and just, recutting sails and reshaping battens and reshaping your foil, repainting your boat, wet sanding things. And I think those lessons, are really, really important to a lot of sports, particularly, the sport of sailing. And I think that's almost a bit of a dying breed of child, if you like, or kid that's sort of coming through the ranks. And, you often get asked questions, from some phenomenally talented sailors, boys and girls that, how do you make the boat go faster and how does it feel like this? And it's hard to explain. You can't teach that feeling. It has to be sort of learnt. You can teach technique and you can teach, how to hike well and how to steer well, but the feeling is actually basically something that I think you have to want and you have to want to learn, and you have to be prepared to make some mistakes and actually take some steps backward or sideways to understand how to take a step forward. And I think that's a really important one to learn about how to get the best out of your gear.
You sailed with fellow Aussie Darren Bundock in the Formula 18 series, team riders for Hobie Cat. And in 2005, although he was slightly nervous that you weren't quite the perfect build, he asked you to campaign for Beijing with him. What did you make of the Olympic scene? And did you then think this was it, you'd made it as a pro?
Look, the Olympic dream for me had been long running. And, ever since I was a sort of 7 or 8 year old, you'd watch the Olympics and you just would sort of dream of one day, being able to go and compete at an Olympic Games. And, it was pretty difficult, I guess, coming from Bendigo, having an aspiration of going to the Olympics in sailing. But I think the opportunities that sort of slowly presented themselves over the years, it was 16 or 18 years of trying to get to the Olympics, really for me, before I actually made it to the Olympics with Darren. And it was definitely not an easy road. I would hate to think, how much money of my own that I put into trying to get there, and I had a lot of great support over the years, with people helping and trying to point you in the right direction. But it was not an easy path. But once I got that opportunity to sail with Darren, obviously my physique is not the perfect size for most boats. Maybe for an AC75, I don't know. At about this height, good for aerodynamics. I think, the Tornado probably being, quite wide, me being a little bit shorter, probably compared to something like a Laser, for example, or a sailboard. When you look at where the leeward hull is versus where my head was, even though I was a couple of inches shorter than most people, globally it wasn't a huge riding moment difference. And, being able to have the opportunity to make your own sails and test and test battens and all your rigging and foils, that sort of thing, that was a really big part of, I think, our package. And certainly sailing with Darren and having, Mike Fletcher involved, was fantastic. The journey that we went on together was pretty cool. And to use our own sails and gear was pretty cool, to be turning up at the Olympic Games, with sails that you'd cut and stuck and sewn together by yourself. It was pretty cool, pulling them out of the bag and, sticking your country's logo on your own sails that you've built yourself. Pretty cool feeling. And, I think those memories with Darren, at the Olympics, just going to the opening ceremony for me was, it was super special, and I'll remember that forever. And, obviously winning a medal was a bonus, and it would have been great if we could have gone one better. But, time heals, and I think whether we won a gold medal or a silver medal, I don't think it really would have changed the pathway for either Darren or myself. I think, we'd established ourselves over the years, and, I think the opportunities that were presented to both of us after that, have been wonderful, and, a great memory, a great journey, and, something I wish I could have got another crack at in London, but unfortunately, as we know, no multi-hull in 2012. So that rug got pulled out from underneath us. But I'm really stoked that there's a catamaran in the Olympic Games, and the Nacra is obviously a fantastic boat, foiling, moving the sport into a future direction. So that's great.
Half the battle with an Olympic campaign is logistical. And Bundy tells me you were the most unorganised guy, hopeless with planning and logistics, until you met your wife, Mel, that he told you to marry. She really, didn't she, took on the project of organising Glenn Ashby. Is that fair? Is he being a bit mean there?
No, he's not at all. And, I'm sort of, I guess I'm the ideas man, with a lot of projects and a lot of campaigns, but, organisation sometimes probably hasn't been my strong point over the years. I'm getting better slowly. But no, Darren and I work, really well together. And Mel, she's been an equal part of, my team, Darren's team, like Carolyn has, for a long time as well with Darren. It's where you need somebody to balance you. I think I balanced Darren. He balanced me really well. We both had our strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And I think Darren's 100% right. He was really good at that side of it. And, I took on other aspects, and worked hard on different aspects of our campaign. And I think that balance, if you like, and certainly having Mal involved, with, because we were, we had our, not just the Olympic campaign, but we had our boat building business and also sail making company, running at the same time. So I would have loved to have come back after some regattas and had a couple of weeks off and regroup. But basically I was, I'd sleep on the plane coming back to Australia, and then I'd be straight into the loft, working 16, 18 hours a day to build sails for my customers and pay some bills. And then we'd be back into the next, Extreme 40 event, sailing against you and with Nick, and off to the next Hobie event, or off to the next ACAT event, or off to the next Tornado event. So it was busy times, and Mel for me has been an absolute rock, and I would not be anywhere near where I am now without her and without her support. So I feel pretty lucky, and Darren was right, so I married her.
A valuable part of the team. I mean, you've brushed over your Olympic journey in a couple of sentences, but I want to go back and just look at it a little bit more in depth. I mean, you arrived in Qingdao favourites, reigning world champions. What kind of team were you and Darren? I mean, how confident were you both? Did you expect to win?
Yeah, I think we did expect to win, and we knew we were going to be certainly at the pointy end of the regatta if we put together just a stock standard sort of performance. We knew that we were going to be pretty well in the conditions that we trained for 3.5 years in, light air, Qingdao, all the test events, all the pre-regattas, that light air. And, I got down from 81 or nearly 82 kilos, I think it was, in February, down at the World Championships to qualify in New Zealand at Takapuna. I got from about 81, 82 kilos down to 69 kilos in July, to be fast in Qingdao. And Darren also, dropped a lot of weight as well. And we were the lightest team by 5 or 6 kilos, I think, in Qingdao, specifically to go well and to go fast. And our rig setup, all our training we'd done was, we knew that the lighter we could get, and the more work we did on our rig, the better we would go. And in all the testing and all the training, we were quick. And, it was one of those regattas that, instead of being, 3 to 7 knots was, 7 to 20 knots, and should have gone to the pub and eaten pies for 6 months beforehand and stayed at 82 or 83 kilos because, we really didn't have an edge at all, being that light when it was windy, and we knew that. And unfortunately that regatta for us was, a medium air event, which you want to be at your normal weight at about 100 150 kilos. And we were, well under, we were well down towards 130 kilos. So yeah, that was, that's sailing. That's the way it panned out. And, to come away with a medal, and absolutely hats off to Fernando and Anton and Santi as well. And Carlos, they sailed a fantastic regatta. And I think, Darren and I probably didn't have our best regatta and had a couple of little breakages and things which are unforeseen. And, that's life. You know, you move on and play on and move on to bigger and better things, so to speak, or different things. And you know, those memories were awesome. And you know, to have a silver medal, you know, sitting in the shelf there's nothing to be sneezed at. So any medal's better than no medal, they say.
I've heard you talk before about how it still feels like unfinished business, that it still hurts. Why is that?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, you after being sort of ranked number one for the 18 months, you know, beforehand going into the Olympic Games, and you know, having won a lot of events leading up to it, and the you know, I guess, yeah, I mean, everyone wants to win, you know, at all the time, particularly at the Olympics, as you know, and you've had, you know, the opportunity of having some great success, and you know, that feeling of, I guess, climbing the mountain and actually being able to, you know, get to the very top is something that you know, we all love and we all want, and you have that drug and you want it again, and you really push harder and harder for success. And I think when you don't quite make it, it hurts. It hurts bad. And I think that Olympics probably has given me the drive to push even harder, you know, with the America's Cup side of things and into other events. Certainly as you move forward with, you know, other sailing and the ACAT and all that sort of thing, you know, you don't want to be second. You want to be first, and you don't want to finish it anywhere but first. And I think that that drive is something that is intensely draining. It takes a huge amount of you know, mental and physical tax. You know, you pay a big tax for that, and I think there comes a point where, you know, your batteries get pretty drained and you need to recharge. And if you don't recharge, then you won't be able to taste success again. So I think recharging and managing that well, like you have to do with a lot of batteries these days, you know, you don't want to have to replace your batteries because you can't. You're done when you have to do that.
Right, Glenn, let's talk Cup. In the multi-hull scene, you were making a stir, and in preparation of the crazy Dida Gift match in 2010 between Oracle and Alinghi, Oracle hired you to teach them what to do on more than one hull. How did that even happen? I mean, it's quite a leap, isn't it, from the Tornado to a 90-foot trimaran?
Yeah, yep, it certainly is. Yeah, look, I had sort of, I guess, you know, had an opportunity to go and do a week of coaching with BMW Oracle, and Jimmy Spithill and Russell Coots sort of made contact and asked if I'd be able to sort of come and do some coaching with those guys on an Extreme 40 for a week. And I didn't know that there was, you know, they were sort of going through other guys and looking at that as well. But after that week, I flew from, you know, went from Melbourne across to, I think it was Valencia, and then it might have even been in San Diego. I can't remember from memory, but we did our week, and I flew back home, and then, you know, sort of a few days or a week or so went by, and you know, I think Jimmy and Russell both sort of made contact and said, you know, would I be interested in sort of being involved in the trimaran program and coming over and spending a bit more time sailing and working with the guys. And it was only really not that long after the Olympics that you know, sort of, you know, early 2009 that was sort of happening. And I thought, why not? I'll go over and have a look. And you know, it was pretty daunting for me. Like a 90 foot by 90 foot, you know, trimaran is a pretty different boat than a Tornado and an Extreme 40. But you know, I'd seen a lot of Orma 60s and you know, other big sort of trimaran sailing, and I thought, it can't be that sort of big and that scary. And then I rocked up over there and got taken out there for the first day on the chase boat, and I just saw this sort of thing on the horizon. I thought, oh yeah, that's a pretty, you know, pretty big boat. And we just got closer and closer. And I remember talking to Reedy going, oh, that's a big bus. And I remember turning up and there was just sails all over the deck. There was rigging absolutely everywhere. 3-4 stays. There was just furled sails. It was just a complete horror show. And I thought, what the hell have I got myself into here? And we basically, sort of stopped, and I had a bit of a look, and boat got towed in and caught up with the guys. And I just was like, wow, this is going to be an interesting challenge. And that it was, you know, it was a absolutely fantastic challenge. And I think that journey with Jimmy and the boys with the trimaran was something that I don't think any of us will ever forget. It was such an epic journey with that thing, and the loads, the size. Really the only thing left on that boat was the bit of the centre hull on the beams. Pretty much everything else on the boat was changed from when I first rocked up, which was sort of well into the program, to when the thing actually sailed against Alinghi in Valencia in February 2010. And what an amazing experience. And that was people think sort of that the AC-75s are big and the AC-50s are big. They're toys compared to what this thing was. It was pretty scary, but super cool at the same time and fun.
What was your role?
My role was basically to sort of coach and sail on board and I guess work with the designers and the engineers to sort of give my opinion on I guess how to make the boat go faster. And I was coming from a completely outside point of view. I'd never been involved with the cut before. I didn't know anybody, so I didn't sort of have any I wasn't sort of scared of, I guess, speaking up and sort of having my say and putting my 2 cents worth in, whether it be right or wrong. I think just stimulating discussion, with the designers and the engineers, and just asking heaps of questions like I always do, and just asking them why. Why is it like this? Why is it like that? Could we do this? What do you think about that? Do you think it's, this, that or the other? And I think just the thought stimulation that probably provided just from coming from the outside, parachuting into that program, and bringing some confidence in pushing the boat hard and taking steps, big steps forward in performance. Like, you're not talking tenths of knots, you're talking knots of boat speed increases in performance over that sort of year and a half, 2 year period. It was pretty amazing and really fun to be making big steps forward in performance with really big gear. And I know it was a huge undertaking, boat building wise, engineering wise, mechanical wise. The cylinders that held the rigging up, were bigger than your body. There was just unbelievable, the loads. But when everything was balanced up and the boat was sailing well, it was an absolute picture. It looked beautiful. It looked in balance, and it just took quite a while to get it there. And fortunately, the boat hung together when it was actually race time, because previously to actually racing the boat, as a lot of people know, that couldn't have ever got around the racetrack. We couldn't get around the racetrack. So the fact that it did get around the racetrack was unbelievable. And, sometimes you need a bit of luck, but that actually all came together at the right time. And that's what you need sometimes to win big regattas.
I mean, there was some real brave design decisions in that campaign. It must have been crazy. I mean, talk to us about that, making such big decisions.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, for me, one of the biggest things that I really struggled with was just how much things cost and the money that was being spent, building stuff and changing things, and how much the sales costed, and, how much how much everything was worth. It was just, coming from Bendigo as a kid, where you were working for $2.50 an hour, to be then going and just making decisions in a boardroom with a group of guys that were millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on different componentry, was like, whoa. But once you got in your head that, forget about that side of it, you've just got to make the boat go fast, you then basically could put yourself in a mindset that you just had to say, well, this needs to happen. These changes need to happen to make the steps forward to have the chance of actually beating your opposition. And once, I guess, I sort of got into that zone, I guess, of, just the sheer enormity of it all. Once you could sort of deal with that, then it basically became like a little boat. You just kept tweaking, and, you just often need 5 or 6 people to do the recut on the sail, rather than just getting your quick unpick out and just actually unpicking a small dinghy sail. And that was, an amazing learning experience, I think, for everybody worldwide, particularly within the teams. Both teams, I think Alinghi as well, would argue that, that the rate of learning and the steepness of the learning curve was super exciting. I mean, your alarm would go off at 4:30 in the morning, and you'd just be jumping straight out of the bed because you couldn't wait to get in there and see what's been happening overnight and get into the next day. And, it's pretty special to be involved in projects like that, where you, there's long days, and yes, it's hard on the family and it's hard on everybody, but at that particular stage of my sailing career, it was just all new and exciting, and boats that were of that size and that speed and, that engineering at the time was just mind blowing. And to be part of that, and I think, to sort of help push that along and instill a little bit of confidence in the guys, not only sailing the boat, but, doing the changes. I think it was, it was really cool to be part of. And I think something that, is definitely a fantastic memory.
I'll never forget being in Valencia and they arrived with this giant wing. Nobody knew how even they were going to launch the thing. I mean, what did you make of that when you were sitting around that table at Oracle and they're like, I know, we're going to build a wing?
Yeah, look, I remember talking to Mike Drummond, quite a bit about it, and it was just like, wow, it's when you actually worked out sort of the enormity of it, like it was big gear, big gear, and it was, and it's extremely powerful. The AC-72 wings were extremely big and powerful, but they were just toys compared to what that wing was on USA 17. It was a big piece of kit, and being able to walk down the inside of the spar and hardly have to. Well, I remember Dirk de Ritter, he had to bend over a bit, but I could almost walk down fully straightened up, tuning the wing inside. It was just an absolute monster of a thing. But again, there's always a way to deal with it, and you put some clever people together in a room, and you work out how to do things, and you work out how to put it up, you work out how to put it down and put it away and tune it. And, really it was a massive engineering, pioneering feat that was undertaken. And I think that wing absolutely was, one of the keys to the success of that boat and of that era. And you look at what's sort of sailing around these days and, look at the trickle down. It's pretty cool to see it, still alive and well.
What did you learn from your time with Oracle?
Yeah, look, so many things. I think life lessons of that absolutely sort of shaped the pathway going forward. I think the sailing side was extremely valuable. The having access to talk to extremely clever designers and engineers for me was something that was unbelievable. Like to these super clever guys that had devoted their whole lives to their field, and being able to sit down and talk with them, that for me was like being a kid in a candy store. You could go and ask the silliest questions that you thought were silly, and you'd sit down and you'd come away having learnt a whole lot of stuff. And those guys would ask you, how does it feel, and what does it do this, and you'd sort of start talking. And I don't know how many coffees I would have had during that campaign, standing around the coffee machine learning and talking. And I think those discussions in actual fact are often the most important discussions you have in a program. It's the ones that aren't in the meeting rooms, that are outside, that where you're in the boat shed, or you're on the water or in the chase boat. They're often the most critical ones where you learn the most, and it can actually dictate the whole program as it goes forward. So learned a huge amount. And I think certainly my involvement with Team New Zealand in the subsequent years were very much shaped by those early days at Oracle and what I learnt there, for sure.
One of the most modest men in our sport. I hope you're enjoying my chat with the very talented Glenn Ashby. In part 2, we hear all about his time with Emirates Team New Zealand, the secret behind the foiling AC-72, that loss in San Francisco, the win in Bermuda, and the defence in Auckland. It's a great listen. I have to say a massive thank you to Glenn for his time in recording this podcast. It's not ideal doing these remotely. It can be tricky, and Glenn's patience was very much appreciated. A big thank you too to Team New Zealand's Hamish Hooper. Thanks, Hoops. Your help is always appreciated. And also a big thanks to our good friends at Crank Audio in Cardiff. Steve at Crank, always there when we need a hand sorting any audio problems. Thanks, Steve. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and would like to support the pod, then please do head over to buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. We work hard to bring you a real quality listen, and it's lovely to have your support. As always, to the talented Tim at Vertigo Films, a giant thank you for your time. He'd way rather be out windsurfing, but luckily for all of us, he also loves putting this together. So to Tim, a big thank you. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Castle 1. Race officer speaking.
Lane line is on boundary up ahead, 35 seconds out.
A bit lower and faster here. Lower and faster here.
Ho, ho, ho. That's a good one, Jimmy.
Still gaining on the lane line now. Gaining on the lane line.
We're looking at 10-5, 42. Matching him on the boundary, yeah. Copy.
This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.